morning, everybody. Welcome, Michael. It's great to be able to have a talk again today with you about leasing. I know our members really look forward to our leasing webinars each year to hear from you and to understand what's happening in the retail leasing world over the last 12 months. And to also, I guess, understand what you've been dealing with when you're speaking to member businesses about what's going on with, the relationship with their landlords and what's happening. We'll have some time at the end for some Q&A, so please, everybody, use the button at the bottom of your screen to ask Michael anything. So to kick off, Michael, I guess since our last leasing webinar, have you noticed any emerging trends or areas of concern that you would like to share with the members?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Look, before I begin, I just want to apologise. I'm sporting a cold at the moment, so if I'm a bit horsey, I do apologise to all those guests that have tuned in and yourself. So my apologies. But yeah, look, what I have noticed over the last several months is a lot of businesses have been changing hands lately. So an important part of that process, of course, is where you have leased premises, you've got to transfer the lease. So I think it's a really important topic to have a chat about today, is that the lease assignment process.
And I suppose, what are the nuts and bolts of why that's such an important matter?
Yeah. Well, look, the lease obviously is the document that guarantees the tenure of a business. So it's really important that that people who are buying a business and or selling a business understand the process. So what I've discovered is certainly with buyers of a business, sellers of a business, existing members that have got a news agency, a lottery agency, or a distribution business, they want to transfer the lease, they sell the business and transfer it. And I've also likewise dealt with new members that are wanting to buy a business and have the lease transferred in their name. Now, in virtually all the cases that I've encountered, there's been a huge amount of complexity and confusion about the process. So I thought it'd make a really good topic of discussion, just so I can clarify the way it should operate. And if you've got problems, there are ways of sorting through things.
Okay, so what do you mean by those sort of complications and confusions, and can you elaborate a bit more, maybe with some examples?
Yeah, sure can, Ben. But before I begin, though, I just want to set the scene. In Australia, we're fortunate enough to have retail lease legislation. So around the early 1990s and the early 2000s, every state and territory in Australia adopted some form of retail lease legislation, which the intent is to protect tenants, retail tenants, from unscrupulous landlords, right? So not many countries around the world have such legislation, and that covers things like assignment of leases. So each state and territory is very similar. However, there are nuances. So whenever I talk today about certain things, it will be a generalism. I would highly recommend that you consult your particular state or territory's Individual Retail Leases Act to determine exactly what the process is insofar as assignment of lease is concerned. We'll cover some of this stuff when we're talking today, but I'm going to be talking generalisms. There's always, with Australian lease legislation, there's always exceptions to the rule. So going back, in terms of in some of the examples, one of the biggest problems I've noticed with a purchaser, for example, is they're all very excited about acquiring a new business, and that's fantastic. But they don't actually, a lot of them actually don't do their due diligence insofar as reviewing the lease. Now, that's a fairly important part of the process, because you've got to understand what the rent's going to be, what the outgoings are, what your promotion levy is. And a big one is they don't check the lease itself in terms of the length of tenure remaining. Now, that is a really big issue, because at the end of the day, you're only secure, your length of security is determined by how long you've got remaining in your lease. Now, if you've got a lease with an option, that's okay. But sometimes, in many cases, you'll buy a business and there won't be an option. So if you've bought a business and it only has, say, 18 months or 2 years remaining, that's all that's guaranteed. So, and that's a problem, potentially a problem, because the landlord does not have to renew your lease at the end of that 2 years. Now, if you've paid 100, 200, 300,000 for a business, spent a lot of money, and you haven't got guaranteed tenure. So that's something that's really something I've noticed on many occasions.
And so you've sort of talked about it from a buyer's perspective. What are the issues, I guess, from a perspective of a seller of a business insofar as assigning a lease is concerned, and I guess preparing a business for sale in regards to that?
Yeah, it's another good question. What I've noticed is with from a seller of a business is it's common obviously that you're going to buy that's introduced by a broker, or sometimes not. But what we have to understand is when you introduce a buyer to the landlord to sign the lease, or transfer it from the existing operator to the buyer, the landlord's got to be satisfied that the new buyer, the new people who's going to own the business and operate it, have broadly got financial skills or business skills, and enough financial background, like a strong enough financial background to run the business. Now, again, every state and territory is different. The wording is actually different, and that's very important too, because it determines whether or not a lease can be assigned. So, insofar as problems are concerned with selling a business, the biggest problem it has is usually the buyer they're short in one of the two major areas, being they don't have enough business acumen or retail experience, or they don't have enough financial background, financial resources. So that can be very, very, very challenging.
And I guess talking about that, because that's something that's come up with our team, not regularly, but semi-regularly. What if a seller has a potential buyer and the landlord has knocked them back on one or more of the criteria? Is there anything that a seller can do to salvage the sale?
There certainly is, but if a landlord has knocked an assignment back officially, it will be on one of those grounds. There's a third grounds too, of changing usage, but that's not usually a problem if a buyer's buying news agency continuing it. The only other issues are the financial side and the business side. So, for example, let's say you've got a would-be buyer and they actually have got good retail skills. They might have even had a news agency, maybe in a different country or state, but their financial resources are not quite there, and that's the concern of the landlord. Well, in that case, what you can do, if you're the buyer, you can talk to if you're the seller, you talk to the buyer about the buyer potentially maybe bringing another party to be a partner of the business, and that partner might have a stronger balance sheet, and they might even guarantee the lease. So in that case, the landlord might be placated insofar as they're comfortable that there's enough financial resources there to ensure that the business will operate. Another way of placating a landlord from a financial side of things is increasing the bank guarantee. So most bank guarantees are usually around 3 months coverage. If the landlord's really worried about the financial security of the new buyer coming in, you can offer them often, through instead of 3 months, you might say, look, we'll give you a bank guarantee for say 4 or 5, or perhaps even 6 months.
Right.
Sometimes that can be enough to overcome their concerns.
Yep. Okay. I think that's really good advice. And are there any specific clauses or, I suppose, terms in retail leases that news agency or lottery retailer owners should be particularly aware of or negotiate carefully? I mean, you sort of touched on before the issue of like having options in the lease, and I also sort of touched on preparing to sell. Is that something that owners should consider, making sure that they've got viable options before they come to sell, or that that there are specific clauses that are going to make the lease more attractive to them from an ongoing perspective, or if they're selling?
Yeah, look, and I'll come back to that lease term issue. Excuse me. Yeah, that lease term issue is really important. And that's, again, often a stumbling block, because most cases, a lot of people are financed when they're buying, right? So they need a financier to provide them enough financial backing. And excuse me, that finance is obviously, in many cases, going to request for a longer tenure to guarantee the loan, obviously. So, so what I would do is, if you're a buyer of a business and you're concerned about the length of tenure remaining on the lease, if there's no option, don't be afraid to ask the landlord. I'm so sorry.
No, all right.
It's that time of the year. So yeah, don't be afraid of asking the landlord for an option, or maybe doing an extension or variation of the lease to extend the lease term. They can only say no, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Look, that's a really important part. It really is. I don't know how many times I've seen that where purchasers, gone in, bought it, and they didn't really pay attention to the length of tenure or the lease term. It's really very, very important. Really is.
Yep. And I guess my next question is, when an existing newsagent or lottery agent sells their business and successfully assigns their lease, is there any ongoing liability upon them as the seller after the transaction is complete? I mean, are they, I suppose, off the hook in the unfortunate case where a purchaser runs a business into the ground and defaults on the rent?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know there's a huge amount of confusion about this in the marketplace. Generally speaking, and I say generally speaking again, when a seller or a current tenant sells a business and assigns the lease, believe it or not, unless certain conditions are fulfilled, which I'll explain in a minute, generally speaking, they are still the guarantor of the lease. So even after the lease has been transferred and signed, the new people have taken over, if they default, and in other words, don't pay the rent in time or fall into a lot of trouble and end up defaulting, the original tenant is actually still on the hook, except for certain provisions in certain parts of Australia under the Acts. So many of the Acts allow for if your solicitor provides certain documentation in a certain specific way, and every state is different, and it's usually around disclosure, by the way. It's usually around disclosure statements being issued. You are then released from further liability. In some states, like Western Australia, it's actually void to have a clause in there that allows an original tenant to be on the hook. So that you don't even have to do that in the WA. So
Right.
other states, you've actually got to take steps to ensure that you are off the hook, so to speak. Now, I can tell you, a lot of solicitors do not know this. So
Wow.
you're selling, and they've left their clients open because although it's quite rare to see, I have to say, it is quite rare to see an original tenant being sued for subsequent buyer falling over. But I have seen it. So
Right.
it's important for your own peace of mind. If you are selling a business, make sure you talk to your solicitor saying and tell them I specifically do not want to have any formal liability after this occurs, this transaction's finished. So make sure you look under the relative acts to follow the paperwork that's required. The solicitor usually does that.
Okay, that's a really important one. I'd never actually heard that before, so I think that's a really important insight, I guess, for members that are looking at selling their business. And I suppose the other thing I was just going to mention at that point that you sort of touched on earlier about the different tenancy acts in the different jurisdictions, and that obviously we're talking in general terms, but you need to be specific. I know a lot of the small business commissioners that are in, pretty much every state. That they are often a really good source of information about the tenancy acts, and they provide really good customer service to small businesses. So definitely, reach out to your local small business commissioner and seek some more information on the acts in your jurisdiction. And certainly our team can put you in touch with them. I might also just, because we're making really good time today, remind members about the Q&A at the end. The Q&A button's just at the bottom of the page there for you. So please pop some questions in there for Michael just as we get through our last few questions, because we'd really love to be able to answer as many of them as we can at the end. So moving on, can you explain a bit, you've talked about the importance of disclosure documents in retail leases. What key information should tenants, look for when reviewing disclosure documents?
Yeah, really, another really good question, Ben. Look, the disclosure statement are usually, let's say, there's a disclosure statement from a landlord. In most cases, before you enter into a lease, a disclosure statement is issued by the landlord. And that document usually, and again, every state and territory is different, it usually lists all the pertinent details of the commercial terms of the deal. And in many cases, depending on what state territory you're in, it will also provide a lot of information about the shopping centre, if you're in a shopping centre, about the shopping centre, even insofar as the lease expiry dates of the major tenants. Now, it's different for each jurisdiction. For example, the Northern Territory, they don't provide that at all. You don't have any idea when the major tenants expire. But broadly speaking, it's your last chance to check that the deal that you have done, okay, in terms of the commercial leasing terms, match exactly what's on the disclosure statement. The
Okay.
idea of the disclosure statement is that it's your last opportunity to make sure that the terms and conditions and the circumstances around upon which you've made that judgment to renew or start a new lease are spot on. And
Yeah.
those same terms and conditions have got to be the same in the letter of offer or the offer to lease or whatever you want to call it, the deal that you did. And they've also got to be mimicked, of course, in the lease itself, the document when that comes out. So make sure the disclosure statement terms and conditions are exactly the same as in the lease and in the deal that you did. If they're not, you must address it quickly. You must talk to the landlord ASAP if there's a discrepancy, because that's it. That's the time when you raise it.
Okay. That's fascinating. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And probably my last question is, and this one's a bit left field, but it's something that we do see a bit of these days, is how does the process of lease assignment differ when a business is being sold to a family member or an existing employee compared to, like, say, an external buyer? Because we do see that happening quite a bit, that there might be a senior staff member that's been with the business for a while, and maybe it's a member that's been in the business a long time and they're ready to retire. We are seeing a bit of that transition either to a senior staff member or a son or daughter and their partner, that kind of model for transitioning the business. How's that different to say an external buyer?
Look, there's not really any difference in so far as the legal requirements of disclosure and so forth. But what I can tell you is it is different in so far as people's assumption that the buyer knows everything that they know. Particularly in the case of, say, you might have a very close, relationship with an employee who's been with you for a long time. You assume, as the owner of the business and seller of the business, that this person knows everything there is to know about the business and, for example, the shopping centre that you're in, and they might omit certain things or just forget. Excuse me. Forget that there might be a pertinent fact that you presume that they knew because it was so close to the business. An example of being I've seen where a senior employees bought the business from their employer. They're actually quite close friends. Everything was just wonderful. Then they realised when the purchase was complete, the shopping centre was going to go under a major redevelopment, and as part of that, the landlord muted to the incumbent, the original tenant, that they might want to relocate them. Now, they presumed through the discussions, because they'd been ongoing for a long time, that the senior employee was sort of across it. But of course they hadn't, and they weren't.
Yeah, right.
So, but when the disclosure statement came out, it actually was all detailed in there that there was going to be read. But the family or the friend, the employee, didn't read it properly because he was reliant on the fact that his employer and friend would have disclosed it to him. But again, I don't think it was any malice on the seller's behalf. It was just a presumption that they knew what was going on, but they didn't. Anyway,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it was okay. It was resolved. We ended up helping the buyer with the relocation and so forth. But again, it's this sort of presumption that that they're aware of everything because of the closeness of the relationship. So if anything, being extra sure that the disclosure is done more thoroughly.
Yeah, I think that's the take out to, like, if you are selling to somebody that's, you've got a relationship with, it's really incumbent on you as the seller to go the extra mile and not make any assumptions whatsoever. Otherwise, it could get very, very ugly.
Yeah.
No, that's really good advice. That's the end of my questions. So I just wanted to remind everybody again, as we've got about another 10 minutes available, just if you wanted to put any questions in the Q&A below, I'm very happy to get Michael to answer those. While people maybe are having a little think about that, I might just, Michael, just with you, just remind members about what your service is to members and how that works, just to, I suppose, highlight to them again how they can use your sage advice when they're either thinking about when to start a leasing process, how to go about it, or if they've just got general questions about dealing with their landlords. So are you happy just to take us through that?
Absolutely. So my role, obviously, with Eleanor is to provide leasing and property advice to all members, all financial members, free of charge. So anything to do with your lease or property related matters, you're free to email or call me at any time, or text for that matter. Anything to do with your lease that is a concern. Now, particularly in cases like this, where you're selling a business or wanting to buy a business, a news agency, a lottery agency, distribution centre, it's probably a good idea to give me a call, because again, a lot of people are not familiar with the process because they don't do it every day. So yeah, that's my role in terms of high level. Now, where we have complicated issues, a lease where you think you've got a case for a very big rent reduction, your rent's far too high, or you've got a relocation, or you want to take a new site. Often members engage me directly, and therefore a fee is charged direct to the member, and it's a standard fee that applies to all Allina members. That includes an incentive component whereby the better the deal is achieved, the more I'm paid as a fee, but the better the outcome for the member.
Yep. No, that's really helpful, Michael. And I'll just also remind everybody that Michael worked with us on preparing a leasing guide, which is available to all members. So if you'd like a copy of that guide, just email your Allina general manager for your state or territory, and they'll send you a copy of that guide. It's a really helpful tool just to think about, having a bit of a plan and working, putting it on your forward calendar for the next 12, 24 months, when you want to sort of start your process for lease renewal and how you want to go about that. I think, Michael, from memory, you usually recommend that people start that process a good sort of 9 or 12 months out. Is that?
Yes, mate. Yeah. The further away you are from the expiry, the less pressure you have on yourself.
Yeah.
So absolutely. If the first, when it comes to a lease expiry, the first thing you've got to ask yourself is, are you happy in the location you are? Is this the best and highest use location that you can find in the area? A lot of people just sort of think, I'll just renew, but have a think about that. Before you do that, you should ask yourself, is there a better location within the shopping centre or outside the shopping centre or a different building, whatever the case may be. And you need to give yourself some time to plan and move and negotiate. So 12 months out is I think, is a really good sort of gauge.
Yeah, and I think that's really good advice, because it's your money going out. It's all about your return on investment, and I suppose understanding what another landlord might be willing to provide around shop fit and things like that. And so you've got to take all of those things into account when you're considering how you're going to grow your business under a new term in your lease.
Yeah, definitely.
So on that note, Michael, we're a few minutes early, but I think that's been a really good chat, and I really appreciate your time, and I hope your cold improves quickly. You've done a smashing job, and I think there were some really important insights there. I certainly wasn't really aware of that one with regards to the sort of obligations of existing tenants when they sell a business. So I think that's a really important one to understand. And just to remind members again, to certainly have a look at the Tenancy Act in your area. There's a lot of in your jurisdiction, sorry, there's a lot of good information available through those small business commissioners and so on. And if any of the members need a hand finding that information, please don't hesitate to contact either Michael or the Allina general managers, and we'll be able to provide you some links and so on for that information. So thank you again, Michael. Actually, we've got one question. How to negotiate forced refits?
How to negotiate forced refits?
Yes, yeah. So I'm assuming that means like where in a lease you've got a clause that says that you have to do a new refit.
Yep. The way I normally approach that is I will say I will ask usually a larger landlord that insists on that. I'd ask for a scope of works. Or often they'll do what they call a tenancy critique report. So the design guy from their department, from the landlord side, will do a critique, and they'll list every item that they want some work to be done with, and they usually detail what they want done specifically. And so what I normally do is I sit with the client, and I'll sit with them in a sort of an objective manner and say, look, do you think this area actually does need upgrading? And sometimes I'll agree with the landlord. I'll say, look, honestly, you really do need to change that sign. It's ugly. It doesn't say what your business says. You should do it. Other times we'll say that's ridiculous. They want you to replace a whole ceiling, that's cost thousands and thousands of dollars. You don't need to do that. That's silly. So what we try to do is we water down the expectation. So it's a negotiation. So look, we'll do this. We won't do that. We'll do this. We'll do this. We'll do this. How about instead of replacing the shop front, we just replace the signage and so forth. So we try to find compromise along the way.
Yeah.
And virtually every case that I've ever had, we normally find a compromise.
And that's been my experience too, is if you don't challenge, or challenge is probably the wrong word, if you don't engage about these things, then often, managers in shopping centres, they'll just have their wish list. And some of those things might be completely unnecessary, to your point. And I think if you do have those conversations and try and identify the things that might be costly, as you've said, but not necessarily relevant to making the site actually really look better. And we've seen examples too where people have been able to reskin or upgrade some shop fittings and things like that, where you can achieve the same outcome at lower cost, rather than having things that have to be ripped out. But obviously you've always got to talk to your shop fitter about sort of what the variables are there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But you got to try to put yourself in the shoes of the landlord. They want the best looking shops in the centre, because the better the looking shops they are, the better their centre looks. And remember, after all, the shopping centre is, I'm talking shopping centres because a lot of businesses are located. That's the majority of the look and feel of the shopping centre. All the rest of the lights and the common areas of the ceiling are pretty boring. It's all the excitement's in the shop. So the landlord gets the biggest buck for their dollar when the tenant upgrades their shop. They're adding value to their shopping centre, and they're not spending much money on that themselves.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we all know we've been into shopping centres that look tired and drab, and we've been into ones that look fantastic. And it's that dynamic, I suppose, about attracting additional foot traffic, and even, I guess, for the landlord, they're trying to attract other premium tenants. So but ultimately what we want for our members is to be able to get on with their business, have good looking stores, but do it at the minimum possible cost. So
absolutely. And look, can I just add too, if a landlord really is pushing for certain things and it's a fairly extensive upgrade, then say, look, we really don't need to do this in our view. However, you're very strong about this. How about a contribution? And often they'll say no way and all the rest of it. But so what I'll do is I'll come at them fairly heavily with a large request, and then we'll continue to work on the landlord. And in the end, we might accept a lesser amount, but we get something out of it. You know what I mean? So again, that lessens the cost of the actual process.
No, I think that's great advice and a great question. Thank you for that question. I think that's one that's relevant, certainly relevant to a lot of members who've been in the larger shopping centres. Yep. So we're just about done. So thank you, everybody, for your time today. I think that's been a really helpful chat as always, Michael. I know I always look forward to our conversations about leasing. It's one of those areas that, love it or hate it, it's relevant to everybody's business, and so I think your insights are always welcome. So thank you for joining us today as our guest, and thank you to everybody that's also joined us or is going to listen into this once we put it up in the newsletter, and we look forward to talking again.
Thanks so much, Ben, and thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in.
Terrific. Talk soon.